And you're right. And they did no real changes except for just division. But you know what? They paid someone to do that, and they have to do something. Yeah, they all do it, but Microsoft is infamous for that. It's a real problem they have. All right, so did we get to this one? Did we talk about the beast and we did that? Oh, speaking of the beast, did we get to wealth flows to the top? Did we get all? Yes. We got monospony. Did I talk about that? Single buyer. Okay. And then, okay, we didn't get wealth flow. That's like monopolies. The wealth flows to us in the monopolies. That's why they want monopolies. I mean, there's a logic to it. There's going to be vast inequalities created because of this. And one more thing. Those on top, once they get the wealth, are going to be even more desperate to have political control. And this happens every single time in the history of humankind. Once people have wealth, they want to make sure they keep it and it spread to their family. And they keep it in their little group. Always. And they want more. So they want to protect it. Remember, the Constitution was written because of fears of the mob taking their money. Remember, Madison said, we can't have democracy because the biggest political party will be the party of those who are poor, aka the vast majority of people in colonial America. And so, this is very consistent with this kind of fight back and forth in American history. That sounds like fun. So, oh, what is it called where a group of companies get together and try to fix a price at a price floor, but they're inherently weak? What's it called where a big company creates this board and they try to get their competitors to turn over control? And that trust became synonymous with what? And what was JP Morgan's idea to make sure he always got his loans back, to put his people on the boards? So close. What's that? He would try to control that. Interlocking directorates with that whole thing together. What's called one corporation that owns other corporations? Okay, so let's go and get to the next thing about this then. Once you have the beast set up, you're right, I should draw this. I know, it makes me sad it wouldn't work. Because I thought that'd be, because I could draw on it. So, 12, the last thing, the development of a new type of entrepreneur called a robber baron. A robber baron was a baron, actually the name comes from the Rhine River. The Rhine River, right here in Germany. And you ever go on the Rhine River, there's a castle every half a mile. And these noblemen, barons, would build their castle and they would stop traffic on the Rhine River, barges. River traffic was much easier than road traffic. And they would charge a rent. They would basically extort money. You want to keep going, take your wood was the big thing up to Antwerp? Well, pay a toll. So they're robber barons. And if you like castles, that's probably the second best place in the world to go look at castles. The Rhine River. The best place, Wyoming. Just filled with castles.
Yeah.
I made that.
Yes.
The best place for castles, and that's why I have the flag. The dragon, the flag of what country? Wales. Best castles, for a very sad reason, but it's still, they're awesome. The English conquered it, but castles for control. And the castles are great. Okay, back to the cool part then. Robber barons. Robber barons were different than the first business leaders, or the first industrialists, like Samuel Slater, who knew how to make a textile mill. These were entrepreneurs who know how to get money together and were ruthless in how they did it. And they justified how ruthless they were by the very basic logic of the market economy, but especially capitalism. They take the risk, they buy the machines, they purchase the capital, therefore they get all the profit. And why shouldn't they? And that is a very valid argument. Now we can argue about it, and argue about how much, but that is their incentive system. But then again, they would be incredibly ruthless, as I told you about Rockefeller, and we've only just done a little bit on how they treated their workers and their products, and they used their power for personal gain. Life is complex. But that's the way they look at it. So here is Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he is taking domination and control over this is the Union Pacific Railroad, but he's controlling two of the big railroads in the east, in the New York Central. And this is Robert Fisk and Jay Gould, two other robber barons that are creepily hooked to his knees. So I don't understand that part, but hey, it was 1880. What do you expect? And the big thing these robber barons focused on was there's never enough wealth. And they want as much wealth as possible to accumulate wealth. And there's never enough. There's never enough. And so there's kind of a sociopathic element in this. They don't care how they get it, they're going to get the wealth. And it's always something they got to kind of deal with. They don't care about how they get it. And this was an element of these people. Not me. If you know anything about Cornelius Vanderbilt, that's him too. And with that comes power. Wealth equals power. And the more wealth, the more power. And they love the idea of people coming and begging and politicians coming. I mean, they would talk about this. And of course, the very wealthy are like that today. If you know anything about Bill Gates, you mentioned about Microsoft, he loves when people come to him and the influence that gave him. Bill Gates alone, it was Bill Gates' influence over Barack Obama and Arne Duncan, who was Secretary of Education, that led to something that wasn't even made yet. Have you ever heard of Common Core for education? If you don't know what it is, its tentacles are everywhere. And that's just because Bill Gates decided public education was bad. Teachers are bad. We got to do something about it. No, he did not go to a public school. He was a wealthy kid. But that's what he did. And what else do you get from this? Wealth, power, and what? Cool facial hair. You got to admit, right? Right? That's Vanderbilt right there. So that's not quite, I mean, those are a good set of Burnsides. And so and so he would be dubbed the Commodore because of he had shipping during the gold rush, and that's how he got his first fortune. He shipped miners stuff to Nicaragua, and this is his great saying: "I do whatever I want, it's my money," regardless of what the outcome would be, of what monopolies would do and how workers are treated. And here's his great competitor, Robert Fisk and the Erie Railroad. I should say these railroads are all gone now, but they were once behemoths. And he called himself the Commodore, and that's why the nickname for Vanderbilt University are the Commodores. And I think it's hilarious that sometimes they're called the commies. It just makes me laugh with all kinds of, just dripping with irony. Yeah. Name of what? You know, I don't know. I really don't know. I doubt it has anything to do with that, but that'd be something interesting to look at. I know that was a later on corporate name. I wonder. I've never even thought about it. Would it be interesting if a bunch of guys went to Vanderbilt and did it? You know, that's something I never even thought about that. So, what you have to get is this. All you have to say is the U.S. relative share of manufacturing exploded. Look at the relative share, approximately just under 15% in 1880 for the United States. Look what it was by the eve of World War I. Over almost a third of all manufacturing in the world was the United States. And the big thing was steel. And the other interesting thing to look at is look how the relative size of Britain shrunk. Oh no, it's the United States United States is still one of the leading industrial countries, but it's not anymore. And it depends on what you're measuring. Like relatively inexpensive, low-value manufactured goods, China's number one by far. But for high-valued ones, the United States and Germany and Japan are right there. And then like, yeah, those Germans. And Taiwan is really high just simply because of computer chips. They're so high. But the other thing I find really interesting is remember economies of scale. The advantage that countries who get this. We start first. Look at the others. So these are other countries manufacturing, and now each time that shrunk. As the countries that started it had a competitive advantage begin to squeeze out other countries. One of the richest countries in the world at the turn of the last century, per capita income, so average income, was Argentina. And Argentina just collapsed because they couldn't keep up economically. And they have their own issues in corruption and a couple fascist governments and lots of military dictatorships. But there's nothing to see here, right? So, also, I want to show you oligopolies. So let's say we go to the grocery store and we see all these brands or go out to eat someplace. There's only a few companies that make virtually everything you buy in the store. So you see all these different brand names and all these different corporations. No, they're owned by so many. The one that always gets me is PepsiCo. And it's interesting because Pepsi was always kind of the poor stepson of the colas when colas were such a big part or a big market. They're not near as big as they used to be. And now they're massive. So Pepsi's a holding company, PepsiCo. And they own a corporation called Yum. And then Yum owns corporations like KFC and Taco Bell and Pizza Hut, all owned by Pepsi. And they also own the Frito-Lay Corporation, for example, and Quaker, and so on and so on and so on. Some Quaker elements. There's also Quaker's branched out into two different corporations. I can't remember exactly now off the top of my head. But look at all the ones, everything from Del Monte to Kraft to Oscar Mayer, all owned by Kraft. Procter & Gamble, you go look at all the different laundry detergents and soap, they're all owned by Procter & Gamble. You go to the pharmacy section or the cleaning section, it's 3 companies, Unilever, Johnson & Johnson, and Procter & Gamble. These are oligopolies, just a few companies controlling the market. And it gives them immense power. So people, for valid reasons, we're going to the grocery store and saying, prices are going up so much in the last 2 years. In just the last 3 months of 2023, Kellogg's raised their prices 16%. And guess who got record profits? Yeah. And then what did they do with that money? Invested it in new food products and innovation. No, of course not. They bought stock. Did stock buybacks. Good profit. Yeah, there's record profits. There's reasons why we were so hit by inflation. One company raised their prices. Other companies, there's only a few of them. Well, what the heck, let's all do it, because everybody followed Kellogg. And I'm not a big fan of Kellogg cereals, but I like other kinds of cereals. You like Frito? Yeah. General Mills. I like Cheerios. Who likes Cheerios? Cheerios are pretty darn good. So let's get to media. There's only a few companies control all the media we see. So look at all Sony, the holding company. Look at all the companies owned by Sony. Look at all the ones owned by. Who's ever heard of National Amusement? They have MTV, all the way down to TV Guide, and I like how they own CBS Games. And we have CBS, all owned by National Amusement. Disney owns everything. And this is a little bit old. They bought all of Fox. Fox TV, 20th Century Fox, all owned by Disney. And it's really kind of interesting because ABC television was brand new back when Disney was going broke in the 1950s. And Walt Disney was doing something that nobody thought would work. This place, you might have heard of it, called Disneyland. And ABC television gave them a TV deal because they needed something on ABC. So they started broadcasting The Wonderful World of Disney. And shows like Davy Crockett, which became just hits. And ABC television saved Disney. It was dead, which is kind of weird to think about. Guess who owns ABC now? Yeah, Disney. That's something, I watch sports on television, so I watch ESPN, and they have all these little ads for Disney. And it's like, gee, I wonder how that happened. Well, who owns ESPN? Yeah. Yeah, they own all those things. So you got Disney Plus or whatever it might be. And you notice this, and this has the main ones, but like Google isn't on this. And Google owns YouTube. Google owns and like 95% of the searches. Here's Comcast, which is NBC, and look at all these subsidiaries. News Corp, but they sold this stuff, so this is a little bit old. So News Corp now just focuses on news, on Fox News. So Fox TV, there's still a tie-in, but it's not the same as Fox News anymore. And Time Warner, so HBO, et cetera, is on there. And that's why, for reasons I can't explain now, the most popular cartoon as a little kid was Bugs Bunny. But now you can only watch Bugs Bunny cartoons on Max, which is what they call HBO, because, and you guys probably never hardly ever watch a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Maybe a few, but they're nothing like they used to be. And it makes me very sad. I worry about the future because you haven't seen enough Looney Tunes. Huh? The old ones, aka the ones when I was a kid, are really good. So here's another example of oligopolies. Look at how many major big banks there were in the United States in 1990. All those banks now are made up of 4. And the giant banks, this is 2018, have approximately 60% share of all banks. So just a few banks control that. It's about 68% now. COVID really did consolidate even more. So the point is, just a few companies control everything. We jump right to here. So this is what we have to get. So this is going to create startling inequalities by the end of the century. There's always been inequalities, but nothing like this before. The accumulation of wealth on top. Now, that didn't mean there were incredible material benefits, at least for some of the workers, but the average wage dropped in the last 20 years of the 19th century. And so wealth was focusing. And so income inequalities, that's the top 1% of income earners. This is the top 10%. Right here, that's the bottom 80% of income. 80% of earners made 20% of the income. But if you make more money, that means it requires a lower percentage of your income to buy food, necessities of life. So there's more money to invest and create wealth. So this is startling. Look at the amount of wealth in the hands of the 1% in 1900.
Is that just in the US or global?
This is US. We were actually not as quite as unequal as other countries at this time. Now the United States is one of the most unequal countries. But then it wasn't that way. You know, Britain, because of the old aristocracy, all well, still focused. Britain was going through a catastrophe. But when it came to the poor, people were shrinking because the diet was so bad. Hey, guess what's happening here? People are starting to shrink. Yeah. Not like you know, I'm 6'3", tomorrow I'm gonna be 5'10". No, just that younger people are not quite as good. Babies aren't quite as good. Diet. So look at the bottom of this one. See, because if most of your money goes to survival, you can't really put money aside. Does that make sense? And so you can really see that. I should add, wealth is really hard. Wealth is hard to figure out. How do you figure out wealth? Because let's say if you're very wealthy, you go buy fine art. How much is a painting worth? I mean, isn't it really in the eye of the beholder? So it's hard to measure that kind of wealth. I mean, yeah, stacks of cash, sure, we can count that. But how do you measure things like that? And real estate fluctuates so much. So it's hard. All we can get is a pretty rough estimate, even though it gives us a good idea. So another thing, let's just jump right, we're not gonna do billionaires. Let's go right to this. This is today. Actually, this is right before COVID. I haven't found a good graph that shows after COVID. Wealth really went to the top. We just don't know the numbers yet. But this is the top of the wealth, about 43% to the top 1%. So the next 4% have 29%. The next 15% have 21%. That means the bottom 80% have about 7% of the wealth in the United States. It's probably more unequal today. The numbers are really hard to figure out. Now, this is not even making a value judgment. There are reasons why there's some insecurity today. And so that's one of the things, when you create monopolies and allow for this, it does create for inequalities. Now, we should add, those who make great amount of wealth might be an incentive for others to become more innovative and create. It's complex, but it's also really hard to do on wealth. Yes?
Okay, when they talk about like the top 1%, that mean like when they talk about like top 1% of people in that category, is it like business owners or is it like just like wealthy family, like extremely wealthy families?
Anybody, yeah.
What would you say that like the average like net worth of one of those?
I saw that figure of net worth of that top 1%, and it's something about 4.5 or $5 million. And that should also show you then that the top 0.1% must just be so wealthy, it must be beyond comprehension. We're talking hundreds of millions. That's top 1%. Because the top 0.1% have about 30% of them. The top 0.1%.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, so those are people. I mean, there are a lot of people in Helena. Not a lot, but there's very few in this, and we only have 1 or 2 people living in Helena out of the top 0.1%. Governors, just a few. And but so I want to show you this to show you that yes, money does focus. Here's the thing: inequalities cause problems. If you get the vast majority of people with this kind of looking at this for their future and looking about this for their children, and this section is always shrinking, they might get very frustrated and angry. This leads to a lot of political instability, especially if governments that people elect don't really do anything to address those fears. Regardless, I'm not talking fair or unfair. If you're worried about tomorrow, you might do rash things today. And that's why this is politically a ticking time bomb. It's also an economic ticking time bomb, but that's another story. So, I want to show you this really quick. This is the amount of wealth that flowed in the hands of the top 1% after the pandemic. So, the pandemic, the rich just got. Elon Musk's wealth went up by something 70% in the pandemic. So that's why the chart is a little bit old. I wish I had a better chart. I've seen numbers, but it's still, we really can't look back at it to about another year back. All right. Oh, let me show you one more thing. I just thought this was fascinating. The states with the highest levels of income inequality is kind of interesting, the South. And it's also one of the more kind of interestingly unstable areas. And California, by the nature of the wealth, Montana is relatively equal. Do you think it's staying that way? What state has the fastest growing inequality? Guess who? Some Californians, yeah. And they're definitely very politically ideological. The state has changed a lot in the last 10 years by politics, by people coming in. So, I just thought that was kind of shocking. Texas is because of a relatively rapid growth. All right, so you have these inequalities. You're going to have a big issue. Those on top need to justify it. And those on the bottom say, no, we need a better system. And you're going to get new philosophies of this wealth and inequality. And it's really hard. This is just a hard issue because it goes all the way back to the Constitution. And so, justification, but also these justifications, these philosophy will control politics. In politics, that's government. That's the laws. And remember, those are the rules that decide if you have monopolies. If you have, or allow for oligopolies. If you allow for business practices that might be harmful to the worker, or business practice might encourage innovation, or banks to charge unbelievably high interest rates. Wow, do they charge high interest rates? If you don't believe me, get a credit card. Don't get a credit card until you have to. Has anyone got a credit card? Advertising for one? Next year, you will. They start getting you. They want to get you young.
Use them right.
Huh? I have credit cards. They're very handy. But if you don't pay each month, you're talking 20 to 30% interest accumulated continuously. All right, so back to this. Oh, here's a cartoon, and this is sympathetic to the lot of the workers. And they're holding up. Here's Vanderbilt and Gould and Field, Cyrus Field, manufacturing, but then you'd be best known for big department stores. And these are the robber barons being propped up by workers. This is going to be a pretty common theme at this era through today, just done in different ways. So one of the most important things would be this gospel of success. And it was this idea that the individual be glorified. That an individual can do anything they want. So it's kind of free labor, but it's a little bit even more pro-big business. And the best example of this was a series of novels that were written by a number of different people, but under the pen name Horatio Alger. And all of these novels were exactly the same. It was always a young boy. You can imagine where his ancestors were from, settled were from. And he had nothing. But through pluck and ingenuity, they became rich. And so this Horatio Alger story. And with this idea that if you're strong enough, smart enough, show creativity, courage, you can become rich. And if you don't become rich, that's your fault. You know, for whatever reason. But everybody has this opportunity. And there are elements of truth. You know, there are stories of people who came with nothing and got rich. Best example, Andrew Carnegie in this era. Now, there's also something else. Everyone in the book has some very wealthy older man who helps them out. Remember, this is 1800s. There's always men, always young boys, always of European descent. But the big thing is, it really set this mythology of the self-made man. Of the self-made man. And add one thing to this. The self-made man really fit in with the mythology of, add the word, the mythology of the West. Of the cowboy, on the plain, doing it on their own. And that myth is still incredibly strong. Just think about so many people dress and what their vision of rural America is because of that self-made man. And not to diminish the courage that a lot of people who did that had, but there wasn't really self-made. They didn't do it on their own. The United States Army removed the people who lived there. The railroads came in with massive government and taxpayer aid. The Homestead Act gave people's land, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We live in Montana. Without the federal government, there'd be no Montana. Where do you think roads come from? Montana's so spread out, without the federal government, there'd be no roads, so there'd be nobody living here. Now, that doesn't make it good or bad. It just means that it's complex. So, the gospel of success is one way. Oh, and that's the whole idea that we can all do it. Anyone can do it. But that fits into another question. I think let's just go to a question, a simple question. What have we all done? How old's the Earth? I would say the Earth is at least, I'm going about 100 years, right? Yeah. At least, give or take a billion. How old's the Earth? Well, at this time, let's say about 1800. If you would have asked people who were involved in the natural sciences at this time and natural philosophers would have said, let's see, the Earth, creation was about 4460 to 4490 BC. Sound about right? Sure. So the Earth is, about 6,000, 7,000 years old. And then they started discovering something. And I mentioned this before with Lewis and Clark. When they started digging deeper and deeper mines for coal for the Industrial Revolution in Britain, or in France in these peat fields, and they started digging coals, or canals. This is the canal system across Britain for the Industrial Revolution. They discovered a couple things that blew them away. Remember I told you how Lewis and Clark were going to look for dinosaurs because they just started discovering these bones? And the other thing was this. They really noticed it in areas where they were digging for coal, but especially these peat fields in southern France. So every year, a new layer of peat would form. And each year, it compresses, makes coal. That's my very quick version of coal. So every year, there's a nice little layer. Make sense? Of the peat. And you can count it, just like rings on a tree. And they started digging down for this really good coal. And this is one of the places for digging and trying. Now, this is actually an archaeological dig. But they started doing this for the coal. Same thing. They started counting the layers. And what did they discover? It's a lot. There's a couple million down there. And it seems to go on forever. That means how old's the Earth? You don't know. And think about your entire belief system, especially for those who were, let's say, European descended without Christians. it blew them away. Did everything I used to know was wrong? How could there be animals in the bones of animals that don't exist today? How could the earth be so young? Did God make a mistake? And if God made a mistake, does that mean everything that happens that I believe is wrong? I mean, this was a real moral crisis. I mean, religions and faith and people had to deal with this. This is a big deal. And one of the things that really got them is, oh, and then here's this one from the British Museum. I like this from 1890. The one that really got them a little bit later on was digging near Mount Vesuvius, north of Naples. Vesuvius blew in 1943 in World War II, just after the Americans and British and Canadians landed south of there. So that big volcanic eruption right in the middle of World War II. Those are American B-25 bombers in 1943 flying by it. I just find that amazing. Right in the middle of the war, it goes a volcano. Well, they have these big fissure cones of granite that have to be just immeasurably old. But under those cones, at 8,000 to 9,000 feet up, it's this. Sandstone with what's in seashells. What? How did shells get 8,000 feet? Clams used to be land animals. No! That means there had to be massive upheaval, and that means that the earth must be immeasurably old. And so that began people, their idea of time totally shifted. And that means things that they thought there was enough time to take, or enough time for things to be created, all of a sudden, there's more time than we can comprehend. And let's be clear about it. 1,000,000 years we can't comprehend. I mean, just think how long, you think about, oh, I can't wait till summer, but it's so far away. Now think 1,000,000 years. I know, even for someone as old as me. So, you have all these people looking into the age of the earth and why some animals disappeared, and it came together. Wait a second, this begins to explain why we have animals that are very similar. And they're literally just coming up with genus species at that time. They're similar species, but they have so many different traits all over the world, especially insects, blowing people away. And so by the 1850s, there were a number of scientists competing to figure this out. One of them was this guy named Charles Darwin. And Darwin realized that he is going to be beaten by another scientist. So instead of going with this massive multi-volume trope, he wrote a quick summary called The Origin of Species. Didn't cover humans in it, but laid out how animals could slowly shift over time that we can't comprehend. And the world must be millions of years old, and that would give reason for all these different species and different animals, and also explain not only the biological difference, but in a way, help just explain the geological differences. And his idea was called natural selection, something very basic, traits to adapt to the environment. They survive. Traits that don't adapt, don't survive, yeah. So that's Darwin right there. There's Darwin when he wrote this. And Darwin, years of research, and then quick scrambled and got it out. And because he got it out first, everybody knows Darwin. But he was not alone. There were a number of people looking at this. Lots of insects were being put on pins and put into things to try to figure this out. But I went to Darwin's lab, a museum in London, and they had just all these petrifying beetles on pins that he was researching. It was kind of a weird, macabre funeral or cemetery. So, it's nothing to do with strength. It has to deal with those adaptations that can't survive. And so, different adaptations survive in different areas, and they go off to form different branches in this giant tree of life. For example, in this family tree, here's a tree of primates. And you have all the different primates here, and so the lemur, and the nai-nai, and here, the marquet, long-nosed monkey. Here we have orangutan, gorilla, capuchia, they're pretty monkeys, squirrel monkeys, gorilla, and human. It's not that chimpanzees are evolving into humans, it's just that they have similar family roots. They have similar natural traits that survived. We're family members, but very distant family members. In 1871, and that's what he looked like near the end of his life, and that's the most famous picture of Darwin with a long beard, he would write The Descent of Man, where he began to use the term evolution, and he included human in this. And by the way, he was really mad at especially religious groups that were attacking him for going against the Bible. So he got a little bit kind of cranky about it. I had to read Origin of Species. It was actually kind of a hard read, reading 19th century prose. I've only read excerpts of Descent of Man. It would have been, I think I should read it now when I don't have to read it for a class. And the big thing that came out of Darwin was something that people either just heard like little bits of it, and they took this natural selection and having common ancestry to there must be a hierarchy of species. And it must be all these smaller, like the lower level animals are evolving up to higher level animals, implying that amoeba are slowly evolving, and through you give them enough time, they'll become humans. So someday that plucky worm, that earthworm, will someday walk on land. So implying that the lesser animals are evolving to animals that are higher. No, that's not at all what natural selection is. But the reason why this is important is once you can say that, oh, we have levels then of animals. Hierarchy of species. That's natural. That's scientific. That means natural or hierarchies are natural. I wonder where that can go. And that is why you have pictures to attack Darwin of him like an ape. And the big thing was, I didn't evolve with some monkey. No. That's not at all what natural selection was. But that's why they have this picture. So you can see a lot of tropes with this. So going into the 20th century, one of the most popular books, but also misleading books about archaeology would be called The March of Progress. And they have that picture right there, showing how primates evolved into human. We've all seen this, haven't we? And it came from this, and that is exactly wrong. Now, they didn't mean for it to be this misleading, but it's not that chimpanzees are evolving into humans. If there's any evolution going over the epoch of time for chimpanzees, they are, by natural selection, changing into different types of chimpanzees. So if you can have a hierarchy of species, what about a hierarchy of humans, huh? Come into it. Or so many other things. Can't we then say that different divisions, class, we just talked about this inequalities, or sex, male, female. It implies that hierarchies are natural. If hierarchies are natural, hey, this is great. This will justify what's going on in society at that time. A hierarchy of humans. And these pictures are all over, and they're so misleading. Even if you know how it's misleading, it still kind of sticks in your mind. Now, think about how many times this meme is used now. I just thought this was kind of funny. So I put this up here. The evolution of a stick man. Now that's science. But you've seen these stupid ones like this. I mean, they're everywhere. And the evolution to become a hockey player. You can find that for every single sport, or every activity, or evolution to punch the game on a computer. But that's not at all what natural selection is. Oh, don't worry about this one. And this gets to another common trope. Natural selection is not this idea that one species is stronger. Here's another Far Side cartoon. And I love the dinosaurs, massive animals dominating the earth, laughing at the little mammal who has. I just find this one hilarious. You catch it? Why it's so funny? The snow. I just find that one very amusing. But Herbert Spencer will take this idea and blow up culture to become the most dominant philosophy in the world by the end of the century, and still the most dominant philosophy in the world today, social Darwinism. And I should add, there's nobody that was more disgusted by this philosophy than Charles Darwin. Darwin despised this, and unfortunately he stuck to it for the rest of time. So, social Darwinism, what is it? natural selection, that's actually, he coined this term. That means the fittest survive. A lot of people say Darwin said this. In the 19th century, they said this. No, it's Spencer, the survival of the fittest. That's not what Darwin was. And therefore, classes are natural. All these groups are natural. Somebody's got to be on top. Remember the positive good theory? That laid out Calhoun and used some kind of sciencey garbage about the number of deaf, dumb, blind, mute, and idiots. Is that what he said? I do love to be idiots. That's very, he kind of used scientific, but now this is science. Science proves this. And therefore, why are people on the bottom? There's something wrong with them. They are corrupt in some way, morally, physically, ethically. That's why they're poor. That's why they commit crime. That's why it's their fault. It's their fault. Yeah.
How does that fit into the idea of monopolies of like rich saving them?
Really rich what?
Like saving them, like you talk about how like the rich people always like to king to them or wanted things from them. How does that play into like so they were?
That's natural. So, I just answered you, right? Very good job. You read right up to the next thing. Corrupt business practices aren't corrupt. Those are natural things that people on top do to survive. I mean, look how ruthless it is in the animal kingdom. Predators kill their prey. How is that any different than what goes on in business? Now, of course, they're ignoring all those practices and what it means. I should add, that's why Darwin was so mad. Darwin looked at this and said, wait a second, human beings have big brains. We make decisions. We can come up with moral and ethical positions. We don't have to be like a mindless animal killing something else. Didn't matter. Okay, that's where we'll quit. Oh, you have to write this down. But Adam Smith actually predicted this. So read this quote before you go. He had great sympathy for those on the bottom, even though he said those wealthy, pernicious few are the best chance of economic growth. I'm not going to have a quiz tomorrow. Raise your hand if you want one. We already asked this. No quiz. Tomorrow, don't worry about bringing your review book. It's in the review book, but I have copies, so we'll just grab one and look at it. Everybody say goodbye to your television audience.
Bye.